I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
Mr. O'Neal,
All right.
Listen, stop, stop.
All right.
Listen to me.
You're not
going to raise your voice again.
I'm not going to raise my voice again. I'm not.
I will have you removed from this courtroom. I can sentence you without you being present.
Yes, ma'am.
You don't conduct
I
yourself.
understand, Your Honor.
Thank you.
And I was just reacting, Mary. I was just reacting. Even when they opened the door, I just reacted. I fired 2 shots, I just reacted.
I'm creating a relationship back then for somebody else I absolutely don't know nothing about. And they framed me,
The guys you just saw in those clips were some of the most cruel monsters who lived among us. Those guys brutally murdered their women, some of whom were the mothers of their children, and some of those women were even pregnant at the time they were horrifically murdered. The gruesome details of these crimes could make a judge burst into tears inside the courtroom, but these guys were never sorry for what they did. In fact, some of them were even smiling and blowing kisses inside the courtroom as they were being sentenced for murdering their girlfriends. Ronnie ONeal III.
If you think I'm here to play around with y'all, God damn it, I'm not.
All right, Mr. O'Neal, please stop using swearing language. It's not appropriate in a closing argument.
That was 29-year-old Ronnie ONeal III giving his closing arguments during his double murder trial in 2021.
And like I told you earlier, you will know the truth, whether in this trial or the next. Better believe it.
This was a man accused of brutally murdering his then-girlfriend and their autistic daughter. ONeal also viciously attacked their son with a knife before setting their house on fire. Yet this monster, this wild animal, showed zero remorse for what he did, zero accountability.
Why didn't you play the regular recording that people can understand what the call was saying?
Objection to the defendant asking me questions, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain
I'm talking to people.
In fact, it was as though he thrived on the chaos.
By the time it's all said and done, you will see who is the mass murderers.
What absolutely floored everyone was ONeal's erratic behavior during his court hearing.
They didn't call Khalil Brown to tell you that. I did. You have to ask yourself why that is. Because I want you to know the actual facts. I did kill Kenyatta Barron. But I want you to tell it like it is if you're going to tell it.
Imagine how much of a sociopath you have to be to represent yourself in a case where you're obviously a murderer. On a dark night in March 2018, Ronnie ONeal unleashed unspeakable violence on his family. He viciously attacked his girlfriend, 33-year-old Kenyatta Barron, in their home, and after brutalizing her, ONeal ended her life with a shotgun. This was a woman who had loved him with everything she'd got, even though he didn't deserve it. But Ronnie didn't stop there. No, his rage extended to his innocent kids. After viciously taking their mother's life, ONeal turned to their 2 children, starting with his 9-year-old autistic daughter, Ronnie. ONeal viciously attacked the little girl with a hatchet and brutally ended her life.
And at the moment, that first time you struck her with that hatchet, and little Ronnie testified that all he could see was tears coming out of his sister's face. At that moment, that child knew she was being betrayed in the cruelest, most tragic and sorrowful way that a child could ever be betrayed. She was being betrayed by her parent, the one person that should be there to protect their children.
Once Ronnie was dead, ONeal also attacked their 8-year-old son multiple times with a knife before he then set their home on fire.
ONeal is accused of killing Kenyatta Barron, the mother of his children, his 9-year-old disabled daughter, Ronnie, and attempting to murder little Ronnie Jr. They say he then set the house on fire.
Miraculously, the little boy survived and became the star witness in a double murder trial against his own father.
I just saw my dad holding a shotgun and my mom screaming at him.
Testifying remotely, little Ronnie was only 8 years old when he watched his father, he says, kill his mother and sister.
Did he do something to your sister?
Yes, he hit her with an axe in the head, and then in the back, and the back, and then the head. And then I saw her eyes roll, and then there was blood everywhere.
He says his father then tried to kill him too.
Following his son's testimony in court, O'Neal, who was defending himself, had to cross-examine his own son, and he had fun doing it.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
And asked him about that night.
Did I hurt you that night of this incident?
Yes.
I did. And how did I hurt you?
You stabbed me.
Instead of showing any remorse, he was angry, defiant, and completely unhinged.
Because I want you to know the actual facts.
Before the judge sentenced him, she gave him a piece of her mind, saying that this was the most horrific case she had seen in her entire career.
19 years I've been at this job. I've seen human beings killed at the hands of others in every way imaginable. You name it, I've seen it. Shootings, drownings, decades, blown apart by cars, some DUI manslaughter cases, horrible things. This is the worst case I have ever seen as far as the facts go.
In August 2021, the judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus 60 years, without the possibility of parole.
On count 1, Mr. O'Neal, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to life in prison with a minimum mandatory of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The judge went on, reading out his sentences, but O'Neal showed no emotion whatsoever. He just stood there staring at the ceiling like the absolute monster he is. But I'm just glad for one thing, the court letting him represent himself, because honestly, no one else could have done a better job at showing how much of a lunatic he is. Markeith Lloyd.
And I was just reacting, Mary. I was just reacting. Even when they opened the door, I just reacted. I fired 2 shots, I just reacted.
That was Markeith Lloyd. On December 13th, 2016, Lloyd stormed the home of his pregnant ex-girlfriend, Sade Dixon, in Orlando, Florida, and brutally murdered her. Lloyd believed Sade was seeing someone else, and when he confronted her, a heated argument ensued between the couple. And within minutes, that argument turned deadly as Lloyd pulled out a gun and fired multiple times at her, instantly killing Sade and her unborn baby. But the horror of that night didn't end there. When Sade's brother came out to help her sister, Lloyd opened fire at him as well. Thankfully, he survived but was severely injured. Now, after ending Sade's life and her unborn child in such a horrific manner, Markeith Lloyd went on the run, and for a few weeks he managed to evade the cops. However, after a manhunt that stretched on for days, on January 17, 2017, law enforcement finally cornered Lloyd in an abandoned house on 1157 Lescott Lane in Carver Shores. According to official reports, Lloyd emerged from the house wearing body armor and armed with 2 guns, one of which had a 100-round capacity.
The police chief says when Lloyd walked out of the house, he was wearing tactical gear, and these were the guns in his hands, which he then dropped to the ground.
At this point, the officers had to subdue him with deadly force, which resulted in the loss of one of his eyes.
Most wanted man in Florida is waking up in a hospital this morning. Police captured Markeith Lloyd Tuesday night in Orlando. The chief says he resisted arrest and he's now being treated for minor injuries before they haul him off to jail.
Well, it's safe to say he got exactly what he deserved. So, losing one of his eyes doesn't even equate to everything he took from his victims and their families. When Lloyd appeared in court, he wasn't the least bit apologetic. Oh no. He even had the audacity to claim he was being treated unfairly as he showed up in court with a swollen face and a bandage over his eye.
I'm raising a lecture back then for somebody I absolutely don't know nothing about. And they framed me.
In November 2021, Lloyd was sentenced to death for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton.
We, the jury, unanimously find that the defendant Markeith Lloyd should be sentenced to death.
Before then, he had received 2 life sentences for the murders of Sade Dixon and her unborn child.
All right, as to count 1, first-degree murder of Sade Dixon, the court hereby sentences you to life in prison
As to count 2, killing of an unborn child by injury to the mother, the court hereby sentences you to life in prison.
After the judge read the verdict, Lloyd stood up with a smile. As the officers were about to take him away, this monster who had just been sentenced for murdering a mother and her unborn child was caught on camera blowing kisses to his family. This guy is just an animal. But even calling an animal is truly unfair to animals, because an animal could have done better. An animal could have been more empathic. Tyrone Johnson.
30 feet, 15 steps, hunting down a 10-year-old child. That's what premeditation is.
Heat of passion, not premeditation.
There's been no dispute on who did it.
A tragic situation that got out of control.
In November 2018, 42-year-old Tyrone Johnson called law enforcement to an apartment in Tampa, Florida, where he lived with his then-girlfriend, Stephanie Willis, and her 10-year-old son, Ricky Willis. Following the frantic 911 call, deputies quickly made their way to the caller's address. Inside the house, they discovered the bodies of Stephanie Willis and her 10-year-old son, Ricky Willis. Both of them had been brutally fired to death, execution style, and the killer was none other than Tyrone Johnson, Stephanie's boyfriend. Now, when Tyrone was brought in for questioning, he was crying uncontrollably as he struggled to tell investigators that what happened was all an accident.
Tyrone Johnson cried hysterically during his interview with investigators. The jury watched as detectives tried to calm him down repeatedly and struggled to understand what he was saying.
According to him, a heated argument broke out between him and Stephanie when they could not agree on who would watch what on the television.
Prosecutors say in October of 2018, Johnson killed his live-in girlfriend, Stephanie Willis, and her son, Ricky, during an argument over what to watch on TV.
Now, I know how very stupid and unbelievable that sounds, but believe it or not, that was what led to these horrific murders of an innocent child and her mother. The little boy was frightened and was hiding under his bed. Bullet casings were found under his bed, which was believed to be where Johnson murdered him before moving his body.
The shell casings are right there in front of the bed, and they line right up with those 2 holes underneath the bed.
During his sentence hearing, Johnson broke down into tears like he did on the day of his arrest. He apologized to Stephanie's family, saying he was sorry for the horrific things he did and all the pain he had caused them.
In a last-ditch effort to save his life, convicted killer Tyrone Johnson pleaded for mercy.
I am truly remorseful and deeply sorry.
Suffice it to say that a precious child is dead. This murder was heinous, atrocious, and cruel. For those acts, I sentence you to death.
Stephanie's father was very satisfied with the sentence, knowing that this monster would not be able to harm anyone else. But even at that, there was still this agonizing void in his heart that could never be filled.
It's still not closure for me. You know, nothing's going to bring Brian and Stephanie back, so, but it's what he deserves.
Darius Higgins.
A Milwaukee County judge sentenced Darius Higgins to life in prison without parole on charges of first-degree intentional homicide and first-degree attempted homicide.
This is 40-year-old Darius Higgins. In March 2019, he made national headlines for the cold-blooded murder of his ex-girlfriend, Sierra Robinson, and the abduction of their 2-year-old daughter, Neolani Robinson, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Yes, this monster murdered her daughter's mother and then abducted the little girl, who was later found dead in a different state a few days later. What made this crime even more tragic was that Sierra had come all the way from Las Vegas to Milwaukee to get her daughter back. Higgins had been with their baby, and now it was time for Sierra to come get her. She actually thought she was coming to reunite with her child, but instead, she was walking into a deadly trap without even knowing it. Higgins had intentionally lured her there, and when she arrived, he put a bullet in her head, cold-blooded, point blank.
Police say Higgins shot and killed the girl's mother, Sierra Robinson, when she met him in Milwaukee to pick her daughter up. Right now, a nationwide Amber Alert remains in effect for the 2-year-old. Her name is Neolani Robinson. Police believe she may be in Minnesota or Michigan.
Unfortunately, 2 days later, Neolani's body was found in a ditch off a highway in Minnesota.
Regardless of where you get it from.
After a week of searching and vigils,
Now, Lonnie's body was found Friday, wrapped in a blanket on the side of the road in Minnesota.
During the investigation, Higgins claimed that he had no hands in his daughter's death. He said that the baby girl died after falling off the toilet at the hotel they were staying at in Austin. Higgins then chillingly said he wrapped the baby's body in a blanket and left her there in the hotel room. This monster would then go on to stay in the same room with the baby's decomposing body for about 2 days. In the early morning of the second day, March 10th, 2019, Higgins moved the baby's body to the location where he disposed of it in a ditch. And his twisted reason for doing that? He said he knew she was dead, and that she had been dead for a couple of days, and that he could not travel with her. That was how this monster discarded his little girl, like some piece of trash without feeling anything. An autopsy revealed that the girl died from non-accidental blunt force trauma and that there were other multiple blunt force injuries to her body. Higgins sealed his fate with his own hands because, as the judge said, he would have just kept his mouth shut.
Quite frankly, it would have been to your benefit to probably say nothing.
Higgins was later sentenced to 17 years in prison for his daughter's murder, and for the baby's mother, he got a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Richard Miller.
Out in a Tampa courtroom today, a jury just handed down a guilty verdict in the first-degree murder trial of Richard Miller. He's been convicted now of gunning down his ex-girlfriend, who was a home care nurse and a teacher's aide.
This is 48-year-old Richard Miller. In November 2019, he coldly gunned down his ex-girlfriend, 29-year-old Renee Williams, at the apartment complex where she worked as a home health care aide. Renee Williams was a home health care aide who was simply trying to move on from a relationship that had turned toxic. But for Richard, there was no moving on. He wanted to control her life, and if he couldn't have Renee, then no one could. Things spiraled out of control on November 6, 2019, when Richard showed up at the apartment complex where Renee worked. Witnesses say Richard was armed with a gun when he arrived, but things escalated so quickly that nobody saw it coming. Without warning, Richard pulled out his gun, pointed it straight at Renee, and pulled the trigger. Over and over again. Sadly, Renee didn't stand a chance.
During closing arguments, prosecutors reminded the jury Miller was obsessed with Williams and decided if he couldn't have her, no one would. They say he gunned her down in front of a Brandon apartment complex in November of 2019.
After committing the horrific murder, Richard fled the scene, but it didn't take long for law enforcement to track him down and arrest him. During this trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence that showed that this was a premeditated crime. Yes, cell phone records showed the text messages Richard had sent to Renee, threatening her life just days before the murder.
Prosecutors say that text message was sent by Richard Miller to his ex-girlfriend, Renee Williams. Hours later, they say, she would be dead.
He stopped just sending threats. He acted on them.
Richard confessed to murdering Renee Williams because she was playing with his feelings. The jury only had to deliberate for just 2 hours before finding him guilty of the first-degree murder of Renee Williams. Richard showed no remorse or emotions throughout the trial, even as he was handed down a life sentence.
But after deliberating for nearly 2 hours, the jury determined Richard Miller was that man and found him guilty of killing Renee Williams.
His stoic reaction to the details of Renee's death left everyone in the courtroom stunned. Even as Renee's family members sobbed on the witness stand, pleading for justice, Miller sat there, silent and unmoved. Michael Prewitt.
A mother comes face to face with a man who got into her home and shot and killed her daughter. Today, Michael Prewitt pleaded guilty to murder and felonious assault.
This is 40-year-old Michael Prewitt. On December 8, 2015, he stormed into the home of his ex-girlfriend, Kesha Jendrisic, and brutally murdered her. 4 months before the tragic incident, Prewitt had just been released from jail, and when he got to know his girlfriend had moved on with another man, Prewitt was consumed by rage. So, he made the evil decision to destroy Kesha's life instead of letting her be with another man. Unfortunately, that fateful morning, Kesha's daughters, Fonzaya and Alfonzalique, witnessed something no child should ever see. They watched their mother being brutally gunned down right in front of them. Sadly, Kesha wasn't his only target. Prewitt also fired at her new boyfriend, who was present during the attack, but luckily the young man survived.
Police say Prewitt showed up at Keisha Jendrysik's home, this is in Price Hill, shot her new boyfriend and then shot her mother. Or shot at her mother, rather, Polly, then shot and killed Keisha, the daughter.
After committing the murder, Prewitt fled the state, and for a few weeks, he managed to evade arrest. However, fate soon caught up with him when he was captured in Florida months later, in February 2016. During his sentencing hearing, Prewitt, unlike many others, broke down in tears as he apologized to Keisha's family.
Prewitt committed the crime just 4 months after being released from prison. Today, Judge Jody Luber sentenced him to 20 years to life in prison.
He'll be eligible for parole in 2036, but the scars he left on Kesha's family, especially her daughters, will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Who among these guys do you think got exactly what they deserve? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe.